One sentence changed the temperature of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Not an arrest, not a charge, not a press conference from law enforcement. Just one careful sentence, reported by investigative journalist Ashley Banfield from a trusted law enforcement source. The son-in-law may be the prime suspect. Those words matter. Every part of them matters. The source did not say he had been arrested. The source did not say he had been charged. The source did not say police publicly named him as a suspect. The wording was careful, limited, and cautious. But it was still powerful enough to shift the entire direction of the case. According to the transcript, Banfield received information from a trusted law enforcement source who said investigators may now be turning attention toward Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law. The transcript repeats the wording clearly. Son-in-law may be the prime suspect at this point. That is not a small update. That is the kind of sentence that makes people stop and listen. Because for months, many people following Nancy's disappearance imagined danger coming from outside her world. A stranger, a masked figure, a person watching the house, a possible kidnapper, someone unknown, someone who came from the dark, entered her life for one terrible night, and vanished. That version is easier for people to accept because it keeps evil at a distance. It lets people believe danger came from somewhere far away. It lets people believe danger came from somewhere far away. It lets people believe danger came from somewhere far away. But investigators do not build cases on what feels easier. They build cases on evidence. And according to this transcript, the evidence may be pushing the investigation inward, towards someone who knew Nancy, towards someone connected to her family, towards someone who may have understood her home, her habits, her schedule, and her vulnerabilities. That is why the Banfield report matters so much. It suggests investigators are not only asking who could have entered Nancy's home, they are asking who could have done it without raising alarm. That is a very different question. A stranger may force entry. A stranger may leave signs of confusion. A stranger may not know where cameras are. A stranger may not know which doors are used. A stranger may not know Nancy's routine. A stranger may not know when the house would be quiet. But someone close might. Someone familiar might move differently. Someone familiar might know the cameras. Someone familiar might know the blind spots. Someone familiar might know whether Nancy could fight back, call out, walk far, or escape. That is the uncomfortable heart of this transcript. The investigation may not be drifting outward anymore. It may be narrowing inward. But this must be said clearly. Tommaso Cioni has not been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement in the transcript. No charges are described as having been filed. No arrest is described. Banfield's reporting is framed as information from a source, not an official public accusation. That distinction matters. It matters legally. It matters ethically. It matters because real people are involved. A report from a source is not a conviction. Suspicion is not proof. Being examined by investigators is not the same as guilt. And every person is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. So this chapter is not about declaring what Tommaso did. It is about why the direction of the investigation appears to matter. It is about the kind of evidence that would cause law enforcement to look closer at someone inside Nancy's circle. It is about what that shift tells us. Because investigators do not turn inward for no reason. They do not move away from a stranger theory just because the public is curious. They do not seize vehicles, review phone data, study cameras, test blood, and protect sealed evidence unless something has made that work necessary. Something caused the investigation to move. And when an investigation moves, the question becomes, what pushed it? The transcript asks a direct question that sits at the center of this update. Why would investigators look towards someone Nancy knew and trusted rather than a stranger from outside? That question is uncomfortable because it forces people to think differently about safety. Most people want to believe the people closest to an elderly woman are there to protect her. Family should be safety. Family should be trust. Family should be the place where an 84-year-old woman feels most secure. But in missing person cases, investigators do not begin with feelings. They begin with access. Who knew the victim? Who saw her last? Who had reason to be near her? Who knew her home? Who knew her routine? Who had a vehicle? Who had the ability to move through the property without drawing attention? Who had a reason to worry about what investigators might find? Those questions are not accusations. They are basic investigative work. And when the person missing is elderly, vulnerable, and limited in mobility, those questions become even more important. Nancy was not someone who could simply disappear without help. According to the transcript, Nancy was 84 years old, had limited mobility, and could not easily walk long distances or drive herself away without detection. The transcript argues that her disappearance likely required assistance, a vehicle, timing, and knowledge of the area. That changes how the case must be viewed. If Nancy could not move far on her own, then someone had to help move her. If someone helped move her, then investigators need to know who had the physical ability, time, and access. If a vehicle was involved, they need to know which vehicles were near the house. If cameras were damaged or missing, they need to know who understood the security setup. If a scene looks staged, they need to know who had the knowledge to stage it. That is why one sentence from a source can matter so much, because it may reflect everything investigators have been quietly building behind the scenes. The public sees fragments, a report, a camera issue, a vehicle seizure, a mention of blood, a question about ransom notes, a possible shift in suspicion. But investigators see the full board. They see the timelines. They see who said what. They see which phone pinged where. They see what cameras did and did not capture. They see what evidence was recovered from the home. They see what witnesses said before they had time to shape their words. They see whether public grief matches private data. That is why the transcript's warning is important. The wrong question right now is not simply, is the son-in-law guilty or innocent? The right question is, what caused investigators to look inward? Because if the investigation truly shifted from an outside kidnapper theory towards someone inside Nancy's circle, that shift would almost certainly be evidence-driven. Maybe phone data did not match a statement. Maybe vehicle records showed movement that needed explaining. Maybe blood evidence narrowed the scene. Maybe the cameras suggested familiarity. Maybe the sealed 911 call included something investigators are protecting. Maybe full doorbell footage showed more than the public knows. Maybe DNA testing began pointing towards someone already connected to the case. The transcript does not confirm all of those answers, but it raises them as the possible hidden engine behind the shift. And that is what makes the Banfield wording so important. Maybe is cautious. Prime suspect is serious. Together, the phrase tells us two things at once. There is no public conclusion yet, but there may be a strong investigative direction. That is exactly the tension this chapter should carry. A case not solved, but tightening. A person not charged, but under reported scrutiny. A family still searching, but facing the possibility that the truth may not come from outside the home. That is what makes this update emotionally heavy. Because if investigators were only chasing a stranger, the family could hold one kind of fear. But if investigators are looking inward, the pain changes. Then the question becomes not only who took Nancy, it becomes whether someone close to her knew more than they said. That is a far more painful possibility. Nancy Guthrie was not just a headline. She was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who, according to the transcript, went to Mass every Sunday morning and called her daughter every day. She trusted the people closest to her. She deserved to grow old quietly in the home she loved. That is why this story hits so deeply. The evidence is important. The reporting is important. The legal wording is important. But behind all of it is an elderly woman who vanished. A family that wants answers. A community that is watching. And investigators who appear to be moving carefully, deliberately, and inward. The damaged cameras did not answer the case. The blood near the entrance did not answer the case. The vehicle taken into evidence did not answer the case. The phone records did not answer the case. The ransom notes did not answer the case. But together, they may be building a direction. And that direction may explain why a law enforcement source used those careful words. The son-in-law may be the prime suspect. Again, that is not a verdict. It is not an arrest. It is not a charge. It is not proof. But it is a signal. A signal that investigators may no longer be looking only at the shadow outside Nancy's door. They may be looking at the people who already had a reason to be near it. That is where this chapter ends. With the case no longer feeling wide open. With the stranger theory no longer feeling like the only path. With one sentence changing the way every clue is read. Because once investigators start looking inward, every detail becomes personal. The cameras, the vehicle, the blood, the phone records, the ransom notes, the sealed evidence. And somewhere inside those details, the truth of what happened to Nancy Guthrie may already be waiting. Not beyond reach, not lost forever, but hidden in evidence. Investigators are still putting together, piece by piece. The case has not ended. No one has been convicted. No official public accusation has settled the matter. But something has moved. And according to the wording that started this entire update, it may be moving closer to home. The first story people wanted to believe was the stranger story. It was easier, cleaner, less painful. A masked person came from outside Nancy Guthrie's life. Someone unknown, someone dangerous, someone who watched the house, waited for the right moment, entered the property, and disappeared before anyone could stop them. That version made sense to the public because it kept the danger far away. It allowed people to believe Nancy's home was safe until an outsider broke into that safety. It allowed people to believe the people closest to her were only victims of the same nightmare. But investigators do not follow the version that feels easiest. They follow access. They follow timing. They follow opportunity. They follow evidence. And according to the transcript, the investigation may now be moving away from the idea of a random stranger and towards someone inside Nancy's circle, after Ashley Banfield's law enforcement source reportedly said the son-in-law may be the prime suspect. That shift is uncomfortable, but it is not unusual. When someone disappears, investigators almost always begin close to home. They look at the people who knew the victim best. They look at family members, caregivers, regular visitors, friends, neighbors, anyone with repeated access, anyone who knew the person's routine, anyone who could enter the home without creating fear. That does not mean those people are guilty. It means investigators are doing their job. A stranger has to learn everything from the outside, but someone close already knows. They may know when the person wakes up. They may know when lights go off. They may know which door is used most often. They may know where cameras are placed. They may know whether the victim lives alone. They may know whether the victim is physically strong or medically vulnerable. They may know who would call and when. They may know how long it would take before anyone realized something was wrong. That kind of knowledge matters. In Nancy's case, it matters even more because she was not someone who could easily vanish without help. According to the transcript, Nancy was 84 years old, had limited mobility, could not walk long distances without difficulty, and could not drive herself somewhere undetected. The transcript argues that her disappearance likely required assistance, a vehicle, timing, and knowledge of the area. That changes the whole investigation. If Nancy could not simply walk away, then someone had to account for movement. If she could not easily leave the area alone, then investigators had to ask who could move her. If movement required a vehicle, then investigators had to ask which vehicles were connected to her world. If it required timing, then investigators had to ask who knew when the property would be quiet. If it required confidence inside the home, then investigators had to ask who had been there before. That is why the search turned inward. Not because investigators wanted a family member to be involved. Not because the public was pressuring them. Not because a name online became popular. But because the facts of Nancy's life made an outside stranger theory harder to accept without supporting evidence. An 84-year-old woman does not disappear from her home like a person stepping out for a walk. A person with limited mobility does not vanish without leaving questions behind. A home with damaged or missing cameras does not become silent by accident. And when the person missing was deeply rooted in a routine, every break in that routine becomes evidence. Nancy's routine mattered. She was known. She had family connections. She had people who expected to hear from her. The transcript says she went to Mass every Sunday morning and called her daughter every day without missing a beat. That kind of daily pattern gives investigators a clear baseline. When the pattern stops, it means something changed. That is why routine can become powerful in a missing person case. If someone is unpredictable, it is harder to know when danger began. But if someone is consistent, silence itself becomes alarming. A missed call matters. A missed appointment matters. A door left open matters. A camera that does not record matters. A car seen at the wrong time matters. A phone ping in the wrong place matters. Investigators build from those breaks. They ask who knew the routine well enough to exploit it. That word, exploit, is painful. But in a case like this, it cannot be avoided. If someone chose the right time to approach Nancy's home, they may have known when she would be alone. If someone damaged cameras, they may have known where those cameras were. If someone used a vehicle without drawing attention, they may have known the area and traffic pattern. If someone left a scene that looked confusing, they may have known investigators would first consider a stranger or kidnapping. That is why familiarity can be more dangerous than force. A stranger may need violence to enter. A familiar person may need only trust. A stranger may trigger alarm. A familiar person may quiet it. A stranger may stumble through a house. A familiar person may move through it in the dark. A stranger may not know the cameras. A familiar person may know exactly where not to stand. This is why the damaged cameras become so important. According to the transcript, surveillance equipment at Nancy's property was damaged or missing, and the equipment that should have recorded activity at her home was not giving investigators the answers they expected. That absence is not just absence. It is information. When a camera stops helping, investigators ask why. When footage is missing, investigators ask who benefits. When equipment is damaged, investigators ask who knew where to find it. The transcript raises the exact question, who knew the camera angles, the blind spots, and what the cameras could capture? That is the right question. Because disabling cameras is different from simply entering a property. It suggests awareness. It suggests the person knew they might be recorded. It suggests they cared about what the footage would show. It suggests they had time, confidence, or prior knowledge. A random stranger can damage a visible camera, yes. But the transcript argues that knowing the full camera layout, the angles, the blind spots, the places that matter, points more strongly toward familiarity than randomness. That does not prove who did it, but it explains why investigators would look inward. The house itself may have told them the person knew too much. That is a haunting possibility, because if the person knew the house, then Nancy may have known them. And if Nancy knew them, then her final moments may have started not with fear, but with trust. That is what makes cases involving elderly victims so painful. They often depend on access. Someone gets close because they are allowed close. Someone enters because the victim does not immediately fear them. Someone moves through the home because they have been there before. Someone knows the routine because they are part of it. And then the very closeness that should protect the victim becomes the thing that places them at risk. Again, this does not mean a specific person is guilty. The transcript is careful that Tommaso Cioni has not been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement, has not been charged, and has not been arrested. That caution must stay in the story. But it also does not mean the reported investigative direction is meaningless. If a law enforcement source says the son-in-law may be the prime suspect, that wording suggests investigators are not treating this as a wide-open stranger case anymore. Something narrowed the focus. Something about the physical evidence, the digital evidence, the timeline, or witness statements pushed the case inward. One possible reason is the cameras. Another is Nancy's limited mobility. Another is the need for a vehicle. Another is the possibility of staging. Another is phone or cell tower data. Another is evidence recovered from a family-connected vehicle. The transcript does not give one official answer. It builds a pattern. And that pattern is what investigators would be following. The pattern begins with Nancy's vulnerability. She was elderly. She had limited mobility. She had a routine. She trusted her circle. Then comes the house. Cameras damaged or missing. Back door open. Evidence near the entrance. A scene that may not have been natural. Then comes the question of movement. How was Nancy moved? Who could move her? What vehicle was involved? How was it done without neighbors noticing? The transcript argues that moving an elderly woman without detection would require knowledge of the area, timing, quiet roads, and physical ability. That kind of movement would not be easy or quick. That is one of the strongest points in this chapter, because it turns the case from mystery into logistics. People often think of crime in emotional terms: fear, anger, greed, panic. But investigators also think in practical terms. How did this happen? Who had the means? Who had time? Who had access? Who could carry out the act without being seen? Who knew when to come? Who knew where to go? Who knew what evidence to avoid? A stranger can still do those things, but it requires more luck. Someone close may not need luck. They may already have the map. That is why the search turned inward. The evidence may have started to show knowledge, not just presence. Knowledge of the house, knowledge of cameras, knowledge of Nancy, knowledge of her limits, knowledge of her routine, knowledge of when people would not be watching. That kind of knowledge is hard to explain away if investigators can tie it to movement, devices, or a vehicle. And that brings us to the family-connected vehicle. The transcript says a family-connected vehicle was taken into evidence by investigators, and it presents that development as a turning point because vehicles can hold DNA, fibers, soil, hair, location data, and signs of cleaning. That detail is where the inward shift becomes physical. Not just a theory, not just a source saying attention has turned. A vehicle taken into evidence means investigators believe that vehicle might hold something relevant. They do not do that casually. They need a reason. Maybe it was seen near the property. Maybe phone data placed someone near it. Maybe witness statements raised a question. Maybe the timeline did not match. Maybe the vehicle's own data could confirm or deny someone's story. Whatever the reason, the vehicle became part of the investigation. And once that happens, every surface matters. Seats, floor mats, door handles, boot space, seat belts, carpets, dashboard, undercarriage, navigation system, Bluetooth records, cleaning products, fibers in cracks, soil under tires, trace evidence most people never think about. The transcript makes one point that is especially important. Excessive cleaning inside a vehicle, in the context of a missing person case, may itself be treated as evidence, because it can suggest awareness that something needed to be removed. That does not mean cleaning proves guilt. Cars are cleaned for many normal reasons, but timing matters. Context matters. If a vehicle is unusually cleaned after someone disappears, investigators will ask why. What was cleaned? When? By whom? Was cleaning normal for that person? Were chemicals used? Were stains removed? Did the cleaning destroy possible evidence? Again, the search turns inward because the evidence becomes specific. A stranger theory floats in the air. A vehicle can be tested. A stranger theory asks, who could it be? A vehicle asks, where did this car go? A stranger theory creates fear. A vehicle creates data. That is the difference between public speculation and investigation. The public may focus on the masked figure because it is dramatic. Investigators may focus on the vehicle because it can answer questions. Where was it? What route did it take? Who had access to it? Was Nancy ever inside it? Does it carry her DNA? Does it carry trace evidence from a location connected to the case? Does its location data match statements? Does its condition suggest cleaning? Those questions can move an investigation much faster than online theories. That is why the Banfield report and the vehicle seizure belong together. One suggests a direction. The other suggests investigators have something physical to test. And if both point inward, then the stranger story becomes harder to hold. Not impossible, but harder. The transcript also brings in blood near the front entrance of Nancy's home. It says blood was found, collected, and submitted for forensic analysis, and that the result could be crucial depending on whose blood it is. That detail adds another reason the investigation may have turned inward. Blood near an entrance suggests something happened at a specific point. Maybe Nancy was injured there. Maybe someone else was. Maybe there was contact, struggle, or movement. If the blood belongs to Nancy, it may show where the event began. If it belongs to another person, it may place that person at the scene in a way that is hard to explain. Either result narrows the case. And when you combine blood with cameras and the open back door, the house starts to look less random. The transcript suggests the scene may have been staged. Blood near the entrance, an open back door, and damaged cameras could indicate someone altered the scene to point investigators in a certain direction. Staging is one of the clearest reasons investigators look inward. Because staging requires awareness. A person has to think about what investigators will see. They have to think about what story the scene tells. They have to create confusion or misdirection. A stranger in a rush may not know enough to do that well. Someone familiar with the home may know exactly what to alter. That does not prove staging happened. It means investigators would have to consider it. Was the back door truly the exit? Or was it left open to suggest an escape route? Were cameras damaged because someone acted in panic? Or because they wanted to erase movement? Was the blood trail natural? Or was the scene arranged after the fact? Each question pulls the investigation further away from a simple outsider theory. And that is the real answer to why the search turned inward. Not because one journalist said one sentence. Not because the public wanted drama. Not because the case needed a villain. It turned inward because the evidence, as presented in the transcript, keeps pointing toward knowledge. Knowledge of Nancy. Knowledge of her home. Knowledge of her cameras. Knowledge of her movement limits. Knowledge of timing. Knowledge of how to create confusion. That is not the profile of every stranger. It is the profile investigators study when someone close may have had access. The emotional difficulty is obvious. If danger came from outside, the family could stand together against it. If danger came from inside, the family becomes part of the investigation. Every relationship gets re-examined. Every visit gets placed on a timeline. Every call becomes important. Every public appearance is compared to private data. Every statement is tested against phone records. That is why the search turning inward is not just a procedural shift. It is an emotional earthquake. The transcript says Tommaso appeared publicly with the family, participated in the search, and stood beside Savannah Guthrie during appeals. It also says investigators do not accept grief at face value. They measure public statements against phone records, cell tower data, vehicle evidence, DNA, and the 911 call. That is one of the strongest ideas in the transcript. The public sees emotion. Investigators check evidence. Someone can look devastated and still have unanswered questions around them. Someone can join searches and still be examined. Someone can stand beside grieving relatives and still have their timeline tested. That does not mean the grief is fake. It means grief does not replace investigation. Law enforcement cannot say, "He looked sad, so we stop asking questions." They have to ask whether the evidence matches the story. And if it does not, the gap becomes important. That gap may be what the source was pointing toward. A gap between what was said and what was recorded. A gap between public appearance and private movement. A gap between the stranger theory and the physical evidence. A gap between the damaged cameras and who knew where they were. A gap between Nancy's limited mobility and the idea that she simply vanished. A gap between the ransom note theory and the evidence collected at the house. That is where the investigation lives now, inside the gaps. And each gap appears to be narrowing the circle. That is why this chapter should end with the feeling of pressure building, not certainty. Pressure. Investigators have not publicly named Tommaso as a suspect in the transcript. He has not been charged. He has not been arrested. But according to the reporting described, the attention may be moving toward him, and the reason matters. Not because of one rumor, because of the evidence picture underneath it. Nancy's age, her limited mobility, her routine, the damaged cameras, the need for a vehicle, the blood near the entrance, the possible staging, the family-connected vehicle, the digital records, the sealed evidence. All of it makes the stranger story less simple than it first appeared. And once the stranger story weakens, investigators do what they always do. They look closer to home. That is where the search turned, toward the people who knew Nancy, toward the people who could access her home, toward the people whose timelines needed checking, toward the people whose vehicles could be tested, toward the evidence that does not care how painful the answer may be. Because truth does not protect family comfort. Truth follows facts, and if those facts point inward, investigators must follow them there. That is the burden of this case. Nancy Guthrie trusted the people closest to her. She should have been safest among them. But according to the transcript, the investigation may now be asking whether the person who knew enough to reach her was not a stranger at all. And if that is true, then the scariest part of this case was never the masked figure outside the home. It was the possibility that whoever took Nancy may already have known exactly how to get inside. The moment investigators took a family-connected vehicle into evidence, the Nancy Guthrie case changed shape. Before that, much of what the public saw was uncertainty. A missing woman, a damaged camera system, a possible masked figure, questions about a stranger, questions about the house, questions about who knew what and when. But a vehicle is different. A vehicle is not just a theory. A vehicle is a container of movement. It can hold routes, traces, fibers, stains, soil, hair, fingerprints, digital records, cleaning patterns, and secrets people thought were gone. According to the transcript, a family-connected vehicle was reportedly taken into evidence by investigators, and the transcript describes that development as a turning point because vehicles can preserve information long after the people inside them believe the information has disappeared. That is why this detail matters so much. Investigators do not take a vehicle into evidence just because the public is suspicious. They do not process a car because a theory is popular online. They need a reason. Maybe a witness saw it somewhere important. Maybe phone data placed someone near it. Maybe the vehicle was connected to a person whose timeline had problems. Maybe it was near Nancy's home when it should not have been. Maybe the investigation needed to confirm whether Nancy had ever been inside it. Whatever the reason, the vehicle became important enough for investigators to secure it. And once that happens, the car stops being transportation. It becomes evidence. Every surface matters. The seats, the door handles, the floor mats, the trunk, the seat belts, the carpets, the undercarriage, the tires, the dashboard, the navigation system, the Bluetooth history, the hidden cracks between panels where tiny fibers can settle and stay. Most people think a car is easy to clean. Investigators know it is not. A car has too many places to hide the past. A single hair can fall into a seat crack. A tiny fiber can cling to fabric. A trace of soil can remain under a floor mat. A faint stain can sit beneath cleaning chemicals. A handprint can survive on a surface someone forgot to wipe. A vehicle can remember a night even when the driver wants to forget it. That is why the seizure of a family-connected vehicle is so serious. It gives investigators a physical place to test the story. Not emotions, not guesses, not public appearances. A real object. A car that moved somewhere. A car that carried someone. A car that may have been cleaned. A car that may still hold answers. The transcript explains that investigators can search vehicles for DNA, trace evidence, fibers, soil, hair, location data, and signs of recent cleaning. It also notes that excessive cleaning inside a vehicle in the context of a missing person investigation, can itself become suspicious because it may suggest awareness that something needed to be removed. That does not mean cleaning proves guilt. That must be said clearly. People clean cars for normal reasons. They spill food. They transport pets. They carry groceries. They tidy up before someone rides with them. They clean because the car is dirty. But timing changes everything. If a car is deeply cleaned right after someone disappears, investigators ask why. If the cleaning focuses on certain areas, investigators ask what those areas held. If chemicals are used heavily, investigators ask what someone was trying to erase. If seats, mats, or trunk areas look unusually treated, investigators test them. In a missing person case, cleaning can become a question. And sometimes the question matters as much as the answer. Who cleaned it? When? Why? Was it normal? Was it rushed? Was it done before investigators asked for the vehicle? Were there receipts for cleaning supplies? Were there wet carpets? Were there removed floor mats? Were there missing seat covers? Were there gaps in the story about who used the vehicle? Those are the small details that can turn a case. Because a person may prepare their spoken story. They may rehearse what to say. They may remember where they claim to have been, but they may not remember every physical trace their vehicle carried. That is what makes a car dangerous evidence. It does not care what someone says. It only shows what it holds. The vehicle also matters because of Nancy's physical condition. According to the transcript, Nancy was 84 years old, had limited mobility, and could not easily walk long distances or drive herself away without being noticed. The transcript argues that her disappearance likely required assistance, timing, and a vehicle. That is the practical heart of this chapter. Nancy did not simply vanish into air. If she left her home, there had to be movement. If she could not move far alone, someone may have helped or moved her. If someone moved her without neighbors noticing, a vehicle becomes one of the most important things investigators can examine. Because a vehicle can answer questions the house cannot. Did Nancy ever come into contact with it? Is her DNA inside? Are fibers from her clothing present? Is there trace evidence from her property? Is there soil from a location connected to the case? Does the vehicle's location data match the driver's story? Was it cleaned after the disappearance? Was it seen near Nancy's home? Was it parked somewhere unusual? Did it stop somewhere that needs to be searched? Those questions make the vehicle more than a clue. It becomes a bridge between the home and wherever Nancy may have gone. That is why investigators would treat it carefully. They would not rush. They would photograph everything. They would document the condition of the interior. They would swab surfaces. They would lift fibers. They would test stains. They would examine the undercarriage. They would look at tires and wheel wells. They would check navigation and onboard data. They would pull electronic records if available. They would compare the vehicle's movement with phone records and witness statements. And if anything did not line up, that gap would become important. Because in an investigation like this, the strongest evidence may not be one dramatic discovery. It may be a mismatch. A person says the car was parked all night. The data says it moved. A person says they never went near Nancy's home. The vehicle's system says otherwise. A person says the car was not cleaned. The interior shows chemical traces. A person says Nancy was never inside it. Forensic testing finds her biological material. Those are the kinds of contradictions investigators look for. Not because they want a specific person to be guilty, but because evidence becomes strongest when it contradicts a lie. The transcript says the vehicle seizure sits alongside other forensic threads. Damaged cameras, blood near the entrance, phone records, DNA testing, ransom notes, and possible staging. It presents the vehicle as one piece of a larger picture that has been quietly assembling since February 1st. That larger picture is important. The car does not exist alone. If the car were the only odd detail, it might not carry the same weight. But it sits beside a scene that already raised questions. Cameras damaged or missing, blood near an entrance, an open back door, a vulnerable elderly woman gone, a possible ransom demand. A reported investigative shift towards someone close. Each piece adds pressure. The car gives investigators something they can test against those other pieces. If blood was near the entrance, could trace evidence from that scene be found in the vehicle? If the back door was open, did the car stop near the rear of the property? If cameras were damaged, does vehicle data show timing that fits the gap? If phone records place someone nearby, does the car's onboard data agree? If ransom notes created a kidnapping narrative, does the vehicle suggest a more local explanation? That is how investigators build. They do not look at one clue in isolation. They stack evidence. They compare. They test. They ask whether the pieces point in the same direction. And according to the transcript, the direction appears to be moving inward. That does not mean the vehicle will automatically reveal the answer. Sometimes vehicles are processed and nothing useful is found. Sometimes DNA is too weak. Sometimes fibers cannot be matched. Sometimes soil is too common. Sometimes location data is incomplete. Sometimes cleaning cannot be proven. Sometimes a suspicious-looking vehicle turns out not to hold the key. A good documentary should admit that. But the seizure still matters because it shows investigators believed the vehicle was worth examining. That belief did not come from nowhere. It came from information the public may not fully have. And that is what makes this chapter suspenseful. The public does not know what investigators expected to find. Did they already have a route? Did they already have a witness? Did they already have phone data? Did they already have camera footage? Did they already have a statement that did not match the car? Did they already have a reason to believe Nancy came into contact with it? The transcript does not answer those questions fully, but it makes clear that the vehicle was important enough to become evidence. That is a turning point. Because once a car is in evidence, the case moves from who could have done this to what does the physical record show? And physical records can be unforgiving. A person can explain a phone call. A person can explain why they were upset. A person can explain why they acted strangely. A person can even explain why they were near a location. But explaining trace evidence is harder. Explaining DNA is harder. Explaining cleaning patterns is harder. Explaining a route that contradicts your story is harder. Explaining why a vehicle holds evidence connected to a missing woman is harder. That is why investigators treat vehicles like silent witnesses. They do not speak in words. They speak in transfer. They speak in timing. They speak in movement. They speak in residue. And sometimes, they speak loudly enough to change an entire case. The transcript also connects the vehicle to the broader question of assistance. If Nancy's disappearance required help, then investigators must identify how that help happened. Was she placed in a car? Was she guided into one? Was she moved after injury? Was the vehicle used before or after the cameras were damaged? Was it used to create distance from the house? Was it cleaned afterward? Those questions are painful, but they are necessary. Because without knowing how Nancy left the home, investigators cannot fully know what happened to her. The house may show where the event began. The vehicle may show where it went next. That is why Chapter 3 should feel like the investigation is becoming more concrete. Chapter 1 gave us the sentence that changed the case. Chapter 2 explained why the search may have turned inward. Chapter 3 gives us the physical object that may prove whether that inward turn is justified. A family-connected vehicle, taken into evidence, processed for traces, compared against timelines, tested against statements, measured against the truth. The public may focus on the most dramatic clues, a masked figure, a ransom note, a headline. But investigators often find answers in quieter places. A carpet fiber, a clean seat, a root stored in a system, a soil sample under a car, a hair caught where no one looked. A small biological trace that survived because someone missed it. Those tiny things can matter more than any public theory, because they can place a person, a victim, or an object in a specific place at a specific time. And in Nancy Guthrie's case, time and place are everything. Where was Nancy after she vanished? Who was with her? What vehicle moved that night? What route did it take? What did it carry? What did it leave behind? Those questions are why the vehicle matters. They are also why the investigation may be narrowing. A vehicle can connect the home to the outside world. It can connect a person's story to their movement. It can connect physical evidence to a timeline. It can turn suspicion into something testable. And if investigators find nothing, that matters too. But if they find something, even something small, it could change the case. Because once physical evidence enters the story, the room for guessing gets smaller. The truth becomes less about what people say and more about what they left behind. That is why this development feels different from every rumor, every online theory, and every emotional public reaction. A vehicle in evidence means investigators are no longer only asking questions. They are testing answers. They are looking for proof. They are trying to determine whether Nancy's disappearance was the work of a stranger or whether the person responsible was someone close enough to know exactly how to move through her life without raising alarm. That is the haunting possibility at the end of this chapter. The car may be silent now, parked, sealed, examined under bright lights. But silence does not mean emptiness. Sometimes the most important witness in a missing person case is not a person at all. Sometimes it is a vehicle. A vehicle that carried someone. A vehicle that went somewhere. A vehicle that was cleaned too carefully. A vehicle that remembered a route. A vehicle that kept a trace no one meant to leave behind. And if that vehicle can speak through evidence, then the next question becomes even darker. What happened before Nancy was moved? What happened at the entrance of her home? Why was there blood? Why were cameras damaged? Why was the back door open? And was the scene Nancy left behind natural or staged? The house did not only hold evidence, it held a question. Was the scene found after Nancy Guthrie disappeared the natural result of chaos, fear, and sudden violence? Or had someone arranged it to tell investigators a false story? That question matters because crime scenes do not always speak plainly. Sometimes they show what happened. Sometimes they show what someone wants investigators to believe happened. And in Nancy's case, the details around her home created a picture that was difficult to accept as random. Blood near the entrance, an open back door, damaged or missing cameras, an elderly woman gone. Each fact was troubling on its own. Together, they raised something more serious, the possibility of staging. According to the transcript, blood was found near the front entrance of Nancy's home and submitted for forensic analysis. The transcript explains that if the blood belonged to Nancy, it could suggest something happened to her near the doorway. If it belonged to someone else, it could place another person at the location where investigators believed the disappearance may have begun. That is why the blood matters so much. Blood is not just a mark. It is a location. It is a moment. It is a sign that something physical happened where it was found. Investigators would want to know whose blood it was, how much was there, how it was deposited, whether it came from a fall, a struggle, an injury, or contact with another person. They would ask whether it was fresh. They would ask whether someone tried to clean around it. They would ask whether the pattern matched the story people gave. That is how blood becomes more than evidence. It becomes a test. If the blood belonged to Nancy, investigators would ask why an 84-year-old woman was bleeding near the entrance of her own home. Did she fall there? Was she confronted there? Did someone move her from that point? Was the entrance where the event began? If the blood belonged to another person, the meaning would change completely. Then investigators would ask who that person was, why they were bleeding at Nancy's home, whether they had a reason to be there, and whether their presence matched anything they had told police. Either result narrows the investigation. Either result makes the scene harder to dismiss. And when blood appears near an entrance in a disappearance case, it forces investigators to look closely at movement. Did Nancy try to reach the door? Did someone enter through that area? Did something happen before she was moved? Was the blood left during the actual event? Or was it part of a scene someone tried to shape after the fact? That last question is where staging enters. The transcript connects the blood near the entrance with the open back door and damaged cameras, suggesting that when those details are viewed together, the scene may look less like pure chaos and more like something arranged to point investigators in a certain direction. That is the heart of Chapter 4. Staging is not just making a scene messy. Staging is storytelling. It is when someone changes a scene to create a false explanation. A person might leave a door open to suggest an intruder fled that way. A person might damage cameras to hide their movement. A person might move items to create the look of a burglary. A person might create signs of a kidnapping to push investigators away from a more personal motive. A person might leave behind confusion because confusion buys time. And time is valuable in a missing person case. The first hours matter. The first search area matters. The first theory matters. If investigators chase the wrong direction early, the person responsible gains distance. That is why staging is so dangerous. It does not only hide the truth, it wastes the time needed to find it. In Nancy's case, the open back door becomes important for that reason. An open back door can mean many things. It can mean someone left quickly. It can mean someone entered that way. It can mean Nancy tried to escape. It can mean another person moved her out. It can mean nothing at all if someone later opened it. But when it sits beside damaged cameras and blood near another entrance, investigators cannot treat it casually. They ask why the back door was open. They ask whether the open door matched the rest of the evidence. They ask whether the blood trail, if any, truly supported movement toward that exit. They ask whether the scene looked like someone fled or like someone wanted police to think someone fled. That difference is enormous. A real escape route is evidence. A staged escape route is deception. And deception points towards someone who cared about how the scene would be interpreted. That is why damaged cameras may be the strongest staging clue in this transcript. According to the transcript, surveillance equipment at Nancy's property was damaged or missing, and the footage that should have helped investigators was not providing the answers expected. The transcript asks, who knew the camera angles, blind spots, and what those cameras could capture? That is a simple but powerful question. Who knew? A stranger might see one visible camera and damage it. But a person familiar with the home could know where the cameras were placed. They could know which ones mattered. They could know what angles needed to be avoided. They could know which parts of the property were covered and which were not. That kind of knowledge points toward familiarity. Not proof of guilt, but familiarity. And in a case where investigators may be looking inward, familiarity becomes one of the most important themes. Because staging requires more than fear. It requires understanding. Understanding the home. Understanding what police might see. Understanding what the victim could or could not do. Understanding how to make a scene look like something else. The transcript makes a key point. Taken individually, blood near an entrance, an open back door, and damaged cameras might each have an innocent explanation. Taken together, they stop looking like separate accidents and may begin to look like a constructed scene. That does not mean investigators can assume staging. They have to prove it. They have to test it. They have to ask whether the physical evidence truly supports that theory. But it becomes a serious possibility. And if staging is possible, the question becomes personal. Who had the time? Who had access? Who had knowledge? Who had a reason to care what investigators would find? A random intruder may not have time to think about all that. A stranger may not know enough to arrange a convincing scene. But someone close to Nancy might understand the home well enough to alter it. That is why the transcript pushes the investigation inward again. Not because closeness proves wrongdoing, but because the scene suggests knowledge. Blood at one point. A door open at another. Cameras disabled. A vulnerable woman missing. The pieces may have been arranged to make investigators think one thing while something else happened. That is what investigators must find out. The blood evidence could become the turning point. If DNA testing identifies the blood as Nancy's, investigators can place her at a specific point during the event. They can ask whether she was injured there, whether she was moved from there, and whether the rest of the scene matches that movement. If DNA testing identifies another person, the case changes fast. Then investigators may have biological evidence placing someone at the scene in a way that cannot easily be explained away. But even then, the context matters. Was the person known to visit Nancy? Could the blood have been there before? Was it fresh? Was it connected to the disappearance? Was there enough of it to matter? Evidence is powerful, but only when its meaning is clear. That is why investigators do not rush. They compare the blood to the scene. They compare the scene to statements. They compare statements to phone records. They compare phone records to vehicle data. They compare vehicle data to witness interviews. And when one piece does not match, they keep pulling. That is how a staged scene begins to collapse. Not all at once, one inconsistency at a time. A person says they never entered through the front. Blood places them near the entrance. A person says they did not know the cameras. Their movements show they avoided the exact camera angles. A person says the back door was already open. The timing suggests it was opened later. A person says the vehicle was not used. Data shows it moved. A person says they cleaned the car days before. Receipts show supplies were bought after. The truth often does not break open from one huge clue. It breaks from small details refusing to line up. That is why the cameras are so important. A camera can preserve the truth. A damaged camera can preserve the fear of truth. When someone damages surveillance equipment, they are not only removing footage, they are revealing that the footage mattered. They are saying, through their actions, that being seen was dangerous. That is why investigators treat damaged cameras as more than inconvenience. They treat them as behavior, and behavior can reveal intent. If a person damages a camera during a chaotic moment, that may show panic. If a person damages multiple cameras before moving through a property, that may show planning. If a person damages cameras and creates an open-door scene, that may show staging. If a person damages cameras after something happens, that may show concealment. The timing is everything. And the transcript suggests investigators were asking exactly those timing questions. Who knew the cameras? Who knew where the blind spots were? Who knew what had to be neutralized? Who could move through the house confidently? Who could make the scene look like a stranger did it? That is where the open back door becomes a possible false signpost. An open door tells police to look outward. It says, someone left this way. It says, the danger came from outside. It says, follow the exit. But what if the open door was part of the story someone wanted told? What if the real movement happened somewhere else? What if the vehicle was the true exit? What if the door was left open to make Nancy's disappearance look like something it was not? Those are difficult questions, but they are necessary. Because the transcript's central idea is that this case may not be widening. It may be narrowing. The ransom notes may have suggested kidnapping. The masked figure may have suggested a stranger. The open door may have suggested flight. But the damaged cameras, blood evidence, vehicle seizure, and inward investigative shift may suggest a different picture. A person close enough to know the home, close enough to understand Nancy's routine, close enough to avoid panic from the dog or neighbors, close enough to move through the property, close enough to stage the scene. Again, this must stay careful. Tommaso Cioni has not been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement in the transcript. No charges are described. No arrest is described. The prime suspect wording is reported through Ashley Banfield's law enforcement source and must be framed as reported information, not a legal conclusion. That caution matters because staging theory can sound accusatory if handled carelessly. The script should not say, he staged the scene. It should say, investigators may be examining whether the scene was staged. It should say, the combination of evidence raises questions. It should say, if the scene was altered, investigators would ask who had time, access, and knowledge. That keeps the documentary strong without overreaching. The goal is not to convict in narration. The goal is to show why investigators may be looking where they are looking. And in this chapter, the reason is the scene itself. The house may have shown too much knowledge. A stranger can be violent. A stranger can be reckless. A stranger can leave evidence everywhere, but staging often points towards someone thinking ahead or thinking after the fact. Someone who knows what needs to be hidden. 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 That is why staging is such a frightening possibility. It means the scene is not just a place where something happened. It is a message, and investigators must decide whether the message is true. The blood near the entrance may say the event began there. The open back door may say, Nancy left through there. The damaged cameras may say, the truth was captured and erased. But if those details were arranged, then the scene is lying. And if the scene is lying, someone made it lie. That is what investigators are trying to find. Who had the knowledge to create that lie? Who had the time to alter the scene? Who had access without forcing entry? Who had a reason to redirect attention? Who benefited from the stranger theory? These questions are why this chapter should feel tense, not final. Because staging is a possibility that changes how every clue is read. Blood is no longer only blood. It is placement. A door is no longer only a door. It is direction. A broken camera is no longer only damage. It is the absence of truth. And when those three elements sit together, they create a scene that demands deeper explanation. This is also where the family-connected vehicle becomes more important. If the open back door was meant to suggest Nancy left on foot, but investigators believe her mobility was limited, then a vehicle becomes the more practical possibility. If a vehicle was used, then the open door could have been misdirection. If a family-connected vehicle was taken into evidence, then investigators may have been testing whether the true movement happened by car, not by walking. That is how the scene and vehicle connect. The house shows the possible beginning. The vehicle may show the possible next step. The cameras show what someone did not want recorded. The blood shows something physical happened. The back door shows a story that may or may not be true, and Nancy's absence ties them all together. For Nancy's family, this is not just forensic theory. It is unbearable. Every clue points back to a woman they loved. A woman who should have been safe. A woman who trusted the people around her. A woman whose home became a puzzle of damaged devices, missing answers, and possible misdirection. That is why the investigation cannot stop at the first explanation. If the scene was staged, then the first explanation may be the wrong one. If the first explanation was wrong, then time may have been lost. If time was lost, finding Nancy becomes harder. That is the human cost of staging. It does not only confuse police, it delays answers for the family, it delays justice, it turns a home into a false map, and every wrong turn hurts the people waiting for the truth. The transcript says, investigators are pulling multiple threads at once: ransom notes, vehicle seizure, damaged cameras, staging questions, cell tower data, DNA from blood near the entrance, and sealed evidence. Every thread, it says, is narrowing toward the same circle of people. That is the big picture. The scene does not stand alone. It sits inside a larger investigation. Physical evidence, digital evidence, witness interviews, vehicle processing, forensic testing, financial records, sealed footage, all of it being compared, all of it being tested, all of it asking whether the stranger story still holds. And if it does not, investigators have to face the more painful possibility that Nancy's disappearance may have involved someone with access, someone with knowledge, someone close enough to understand the home, someone who knew what needed to be hidden. That is why Chapter 4 ends with the house itself. Not as a quiet home anymore, but as a scene that may have been made to speak falsely. The blood near the entrance whispered that something happened there. The open back door pointed outward. The damaged cameras created silence. But investigators are trained to question silence. They are trained to ask why a scene looks the way it looks. They are trained to ask whether evidence is natural or arranged. And in Nancy Guthrie's case, those questions may be leading them closer to the truth. Because if the scene was staged, then the real story was not in what investigators were meant to see. It was in what someone tried to hide. And the next place to look is not only the blood, the doors, or the cameras, it is the digital trail, the phones, the calls, the towers, the searches, the ransom notes. The records that do not care who cries on camera, who stays silent, or who tells a careful story. Because if a scene can be staged, a digital record is much harder to fool. And that is where the investigation goes next. The house could be staged. A door could be left open. A camera could be damaged. A room could be made to look like something happened one way when it really happened another. But digital evidence is different. It is harder to frighten, harder to bend, harder to clean, harder to make emotional. A phone does not care who is grieving. A cell tower does not care who looks innocent. A search history does not care what someone says in public. A vehicle system does not care what story is told afterward. It records what it records. And in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, according to the transcript, investigators were not only looking at the physical scene anymore, they were reviewing phone records, calls, cell tower data, computers, tablets, smart devices, search histories, deleted files, financial records, and the ransom notes that may have created confusion around the case. That is where the investigation becomes harder to escape. Because once digital evidence enters a case, the timeline becomes less about memory and more about data. People can forget. People can lie. People can panic. People can say they were home, asleep, confused, or nowhere near the scene. But a phone may show movement. A tower may show direction. A device may show searches. A deleted file may still be recovered. A bank record may show pressure. A message may reveal fear, planning, or misdirection. That is why Chapter 5 begins with the digital trail. Because if the physical scene raises questions, the digital record may answer them. The transcript says investigators were reviewing every call made to and from Nancy's number in the days and hours before she disappeared, along with calls made by people closest to her during that same window. They were building a timeline that compared where people said they were against where their phones actually appeared to be. That is one of the most important investigative steps. In a missing person case, time is everything. Who called Nancy? When? How long did the call last? Who called after she vanished? Who did not call? Who claimed they were asleep? Who suddenly stopped using their phone? Who moved near the area? Who had a gap in activity? Who was where they said they were? Who was not? Each answer tightens the timeline, and each mismatch becomes dangerous. If someone says they were across town, but their phone pinged near Nancy's home, that matters. If someone says they did not speak to her, but records show a call, that matters. If someone says they were asleep, but their phone moved, that matters. If someone says they had no reason to be in the area, but cell data places them nearby, that matters. Not because a phone location alone proves guilt. It does not. But because a false statement can be more powerful than the location itself. A person may have an innocent reason to be near a place, but if they lie about being there, investigators ask why. That is how digital evidence turns small gaps into major questions. The transcript says, cell tower data does not forget and can make it difficult for someone to claim they were in one place when their phone was connecting somewhere else. That idea sits at the center of this chapter. Of course, cell tower data is not perfect. It may not place a person at an exact front door. It may not show what they were doing. It may not prove who was holding the phone. But it can narrow a location. It can show movement. It can show patterns. It can show whether a story is possible or impossible. And in a case like Nancy's, possible versus impossible matters. Because investigators are not only asking who had access, they are asking whose story survives contact with the records. That is the key. A good lie can sound human. It can include emotion. It can include confusion. It can include grief. It can include details that feel believable. But if the records do not match, the lie begins to crack. The transcript connects this to a larger theme. Investigators do not accept grief at face value. They compare what someone says publicly with what the phone records show privately. That is not cruelty. That is investigation. Someone can cry and still be questioned. Someone can stand with family and still have their timeline checked. Someone can appear broken and still have digital records that need explaining. The public may watch grief and feel certain. Investigators watch the evidence. That difference is why this case feels so tense. Because according to the transcript, Tommaso Cioni appeared publicly with the family, participated in the search, and stood beside Savannah Guthrie during appeals. But the transcript also stresses that he has not been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement, has not been arrested, and has not been charged. That careful balance matters. The script must not say the public grief was false. It must say investigators would test all public behavior against private evidence. That is fair. That is accurate to the transcript. And it keeps the documentary from overreaching. Digital evidence can also reach beyond phones. The transcript says investigators may examine computers, tablets, and smart devices inside the home for searches, access logs, deleted files, financial records, and other traces of activity. That opens another layer. A home is not just walls anymore. It is devices. A laptop may show searches. A tablet may show messages. A smart speaker may log activity. A doorbell camera may capture movement. A router may show connected devices. A phone may store location history. A cloud backup may preserve deleted material. A financial app may show pressure. A browser history may reveal planning. A deleted file may still be recoverable. That is why investigators search digital surfaces carefully. Because people often misunderstand deletion. They think if they erase a message, it is gone. They think if they clear a search history, it disappears. They think if they delete a file, the past is clean. But forensic tools can sometimes recover what people believe they removed. And even when content is gone, traces may remain. A timestamp, a file name, a backup, a sync record, a login, a device connection, a gap where activity should be. Sometimes the absence itself becomes strange. That is why digital evidence is not only about what exists. It is also about what should exist, but does not. If a security camera was active before and after, but not during the key window, investigators ask why. If a phone was used all evening, but suddenly goes silent during the critical minutes, investigators ask why. If a file is deleted right after a disappearance, investigators ask why. If a device is wiped, investigators ask why. If search history stops at the exact time it should matter most, investigators ask why. Each why builds pressure. And the pressure in this transcript keeps pointing toward the same idea. The case may have been misdirected. That is where the ransom notes enter. At first, ransom notes can make a case look like a kidnapping. They suggest someone took Nancy for money. They suggest an outside actor. They suggest negotiation, payment, and a victim being held somewhere. But the transcript asks whether the Bitcoin ransom notes were genuine communication from someone who had Nancy, or whether they may have been designed to create confusion and buy time. That question is powerful, because ransom demands can pull investigators in a specific direction. They can make the public imagine kidnappers. They can make media coverage focus on payment. They can make people look outward, away from the victim's inner circle. They can create noise. And noise can be useful to someone who wants attention elsewhere. The transcript explains that Bitcoin is not a random choice, because it is often selected by people who want transactions to be harder to trace through traditional banking systems. It frames the demand as something that may suggest planning rather than impulse. That does not prove the ransom notes were fake. It does not prove who sent them. It does not prove inside involvement. But it raises important investigative questions. Who had the technical knowledge to request Bitcoin? Who benefited from a kidnapping theory? Were the notes written by someone actually holding Nancy? Were they sent by an opportunist exploiting the case? Were they created to make investigators look outside the family circle? Were they designed to buy time while evidence was cleaned, hidden, or moved? Those possibilities matter because ransom notes can be both evidence and misdirection. If genuine, they may lead to the person responsible. If false, they may reveal someone trying to control the story. Either way, investigators cannot ignore them. They would examine language, timing, metadata, delivery method, payment instructions, wallet addresses, device traces, IP information if available, connection to prior scams, connection to people close to the case. And they would ask whether the notes match what is known from the physical scene. That is the test. A real kidnapper usually has something to gain from proving control. A fake ransom note may avoid details only the true perpetrator would know. A genuine demand may create communication patterns. A misdirection demand may create confusion but no real path. Investigators would compare the ransom notes to the rest of the evidence. The damaged cameras, the blood near the entrance, the open back door, the vehicle in evidence, the phone records, the possible staging. If the ransom notes point outward but everything else points inward, investigators have to ask whether the notes were meant to distract. That is why the transcript says the ransom notes take on a different meaning when viewed through Banfield's reported revelation. If attention is turning towards someone inside Nancy's circle, the ransom demand may look less like proof of an outside kidnapper and more like a possible attempt to create confusion. Again, this must be framed carefully. May look, could suggest. Investigators may examine. Not this proves, because there is no public conviction in this transcript. The power of this chapter comes from showing how investigators think, not from declaring an answer before the evidence is complete. And how investigators think is simple. Who benefits from the story? If the story is a stranger kidnapped Nancy, who benefits? If the story is Bitcoin ransom means outsider, who benefits? If the story is the back door was open, so she left that way, who benefits? If the story is damaged cameras mean mystery, who benefits? Misdirection is not random. It serves someone. It buys time. It creates doubt. It sends searchers the wrong way. It pulls media attention toward dramatic theories. It allows someone close to appear like another victim of the situation. That is why digital evidence and ransom notes belong in the same chapter. The ransom notes may be part of the story someone wanted told. The digital trail may reveal whether that story holds. If the notes were sent from a device linked to an outsider, that matters. If they were sent through methods that cannot be connected, that leaves uncertainty. If they were connected to someone exploiting the case, that creates a separate criminal path. If they were connected to someone inside the circle, the case changes dramatically. But until that is proven, the documentary must stay cautious. The transcript says every thread is being pulled at the same time. Ransom notes, vehicle seizure, damaged cameras, stage scene questions, cell tower data, DNA from the blood near the entrance, and sealed evidence. It says those threads are leading toward a narrow circle of people. That is the strongest way to describe the investigation. Not one clue. Threads. Each thread may be weak alone. But when many threads pull in the same direction, investigators pay attention. The phone records can show movement. The vehicle can show routes. The blood can show contact. The cameras can show what someone did not want seen. The ransom notes can show possible misdirection. The financial records can show motive or pressure. The witness interviews can show odd behavior. The sealed footage can show what the public has not seen. That is how the investigation narrows. Slowly, methodically, not through one dramatic reveal, but through one inconsistency after another. The transcript also raises financial evidence. It says investigators would examine money, insurance policies, debts, transfers, withdrawals, and financial pressure when scrutiny turns towards someone inside a victim's family. It makes clear this is standard investigative practice, not an accusation. That distinction is important. Money is often examined in family cases because it can answer the why. But reviewing financial records does not mean someone is guilty. It means investigators are checking whether pressure existed. Was anyone in debt? Was there an insurance benefit? Was there control over accounts? Were there transfers? Were there disagreements about money? Was anyone expecting inheritance? Did anyone stand to gain or avoid losing authority? These questions may feel uncomfortable, but they are normal. And in a case where a ransom note appears, money becomes even more central. Was the ransom demand real? Was it a cover? Was it meant to suggest financial motive by a stranger? Was it meant to muddy the water? Investigators would not answer that through feeling. They would answer it through records. Bank records, crypto tracing, device analysis, message metadata, financial timelines. That is why Chapter 5 should feel like the case is leaving the visible world and entering the hidden one. The visible world is the house, the door, the camera, the car, the blood. The hidden world is data, calls, towers, files, searches, money, deleted messages, ransom metadata. That hidden world may be where the truth waits. Because whoever caused Nancy's disappearance may have tried to control the physical scene. But controlling every digital trace is much harder. You can damage a camera, but the system may still preserve a log. You can delete a file, but a backup may still exist. You can turn off a phone, but the gap itself may matter. You can request Bitcoin, but investigators can still follow wallet activity. You can say you were home, but your phone may disagree. You can appear beside the family, but your private timeline may tell another story. That is why the transcript ends this section with a warning. Investigators compare what someone says publicly against what the records show privately. That line should stay in the documentary. It captures the whole investigative shift. Public grief is visible. Private data is testable. Public statements can be emotional. Digital records can be precise. Public theories can spread quickly. Evidence moves slowly, but it lasts. And in Nancy's case, the records may be getting closer to the truth than any press conference has. Still, the family is left waiting. That cannot be forgotten. Behind every phone record is a missing mother. Behind every vehicle test is a grandmother who did not come home. Behind every ransom note is a family being pulled between hope and horror. Behind every sealed record is the possibility of an answer they may not be ready to hear, but need anyway. This is why false misdirection, if it happened, would be so cruel. It would not only mislead police, it would hurt the family twice. First by taking Nancy, then by making them chase a story that may not be real. It would force them to imagine her alive somewhere because of a ransom demand. It would make them hope, fear, wait, and suffer longer. That is why investigators have to know whether the ransom notes were genuine, not only for legal proof, for the family's sanity. Because hope built on deception is another kind of injury. The transcript does not give final answers. It gives movement. Phone records being reviewed, cell tower data being mapped, devices being examined, financial records being studied, ransom notes being questioned, evidence being narrowed. And in the background, one reported phrase continues to hang over everything. The son-in-law may be the prime suspect. Not charged, not arrested, not publicly named by law enforcement, but reportedly under serious scrutiny. And if that scrutiny is real, the digital trail may explain why. Because the digital world often sees what people hope no one noticed. A call, a ping, a route, a search, a deletion, a transaction, a silence. Any one of those can become the thread that pulls the whole story apart. That is where Chapter 5 ends. The physical scene raised questions. The vehicle gave investigators something to test. The blood and cameras suggested possible staging. The ransom notes may have created confusion. But the digital trail may be the thing that separates performance from truth. Because a person can stage a room. A person can damage a camera. A person can write a note. A person can stand in public and grieve. But somewhere, in the hidden records of phones, towers, searches, vehicles, and money, the real timeline may still be intact. And if investigators are right, that timeline is not leading them farther away. It is leading them closer. Closer to the people who knew Nancy. Closer to the evidence already collected. Closer to the answers someone may have believed would stay buried. And closer to the final sealed pieces that could decide everything. The most important evidence in the Nancy Guthrie case may not be the evidence the public has already seen. It may be the evidence still sealed. The recording no one has heard. The footage no one has watched in full. The DNA results not yet explained. The genetic genealogy work moving quietly behind closed doors. The witness statements being compared against phone records. The vehicle data being tested against routes, timings, and public claims. That is where this case becomes more serious. Because according to the transcript, investigators may be protecting three major pieces of evidence. The first 911 call, the full doorbell footage, and DNA recovered from the scene that may be moving through genetic genealogy work. Those are not small pieces. Those are the kind of pieces that can change a case. Not because they are dramatic, but because they may explain why investigators are now reportedly looking inward. For months, the public has had fragments. A missing elderly woman, a damaged camera system, a family-connected vehicle taken into evidence, blood near the entrance, ransom notes that may or may not be real. A report from Ashley Banfield that a law enforcement source said the son-in-law may be the prime suspect. But fragments are not the whole case. Investigators often hold back the most important details. They do it to protect the investigation. They do it to test witness statements. They do it to keep false confessors away. They do it because once evidence becomes public, everyone can shape their story around it. That is why sealed evidence matters. It belongs to investigators before it belongs to the public. And if the sealed evidence is being protected this carefully, it may be because it will matter in court. The transcript raises the first sealed piece, the 911 call. A first emergency call can be one of the most revealing moments in an investigation. Not because every caller tells the truth, not because panic always means innocence, but because the first call often happens before people have time to organize their words. Before lawyers, before public statements, before carefully written family appeals, before anyone knows which details will later matter. A first 911 call can capture raw fear, confusion, names, timelines, background sounds, breathing, hesitation. A person's first version of what happened. That first version can become extremely important. Because if the first version changes later, investigators ask why. If a name is mentioned on the call and later avoided, investigators ask why. If the caller describes something that does not match the scene, investigators ask why. If there is something heard in the background that places someone nearby, investigators ask why. If the call reveals what people knew before police arrived, investigators ask how they knew it. That is why the transcript suggests the first 911 call may matter deeply. It says that if the 911 call contains a name mentioned in panic that connects to someone inside the family circle, investigators would have every reason to seal it until the case is ready for prosecution. That must be handled carefully. The transcript is not saying that definitely happened. It is saying if that happened, it would explain why the call is protected. That distinction matters. But even as a possibility, it shows why investigators may treat the call as sensitive. A 911 call is not only a request for help, it can be the first snapshot of truth, or the first sign that something is wrong with the story. The second sealed piece is the full doorbell footage. The public may have seen clips, still images, or summaries. But full footage is different. Full footage does not only show one moment, it shows pattern. Who came by? When? How many times? What vehicle appeared? Was there surveillance before February 1st? Did someone visit more than they admitted? Did a person or vehicle connected to the family circle appear near the property in the days or weeks before Nancy vanished? Did the same figure return? Did someone know where the cameras were? Did someone avoid certain angles? Those questions matter because one clip can mislead. A full timeline can explain. The transcript says, if full doorbell footage shows a family-connected vehicle visiting Nancy's property in the days before February 1st, it could become evidence of something more deliberate rather than a random stranger watching the home. Again, that is framed as an if. But it is a powerful if, because repeated visits change meaning. A stranger appearing once may suggest opportunity. A familiar vehicle appearing repeatedly may suggest knowledge, planning, or access. A person close to Nancy may have innocent reasons to visit. That is true. But if visits were hidden, denied, or timed strangely, investigators would examine them closely. The doorbell footage may answer questions the public has been asking from the beginning. Who approached the house? Was the masked figure alone? Was there more activity before the night Nancy disappeared? Did anyone test the cameras? Did anyone enter blind spots? Was there a vehicle parked where neighbors would not notice? Did the footage show routine family visits, or something that looked different? That is why the full footage matters more than a single released clip. A clip creates suspicion. A full sequence creates a timeline, and a timeline is what prosecutors need. The third sealed piece is DNA. The transcript says DNA recovered from the scene may be narrowed through genetic genealogy work, moving branch by branch toward a name. DNA is powerful because it can cut through performance. A person can say they were not there. DNA can challenge that. A person can say they had no contact with a location. DNA can ask why their biological material was found there. A person can say they never entered a vehicle. DNA can say otherwise. But DNA must be understood correctly. DNA does not automatically prove guilt. People close to Nancy may have innocent reasons for their DNA to be in her home. Family members visit homes. They touch doors. They sit on furniture. They hug. They leave trace material without any crime. That is why location matters. Type of sample matters. Freshness matters. Quantity matters. Context matters. DNA on a kitchen chair may mean something different from DNA in blood near an entrance. DNA in a vehicle trunk may mean something different from DNA on a passenger seat used every week. DNA is strongest when it appears somewhere it should not be, or when someone denies contact that the DNA proves. That is why genetic genealogy may be important if the sample belongs to an unknown person. Genetic genealogy can help investigators narrow a biological sample by comparing it through family lines, building toward possible identities. It can be slow. It can be careful. It can be complicated. But if it points towards someone already inside the investigation, the case can change quickly. The transcript presents this as one of the reasons the investigation may be moving inward. The 911 call, full doorbell footage, and DNA work are described as sealed pieces that may all be protected because they could matter in a courtroom. That is the key. Courtroom evidence must be protected. Investigators cannot let the public contaminate witness memory. They cannot let people adjust statements to fit unreleased facts. They cannot allow online theories to shape testimony. They cannot let possible suspects know exactly what has been found. So they seal. They hold back. They let the public wonder. And while the public wonders, investigators compare. They compare the 911 call to later statements. They compare full footage to witness memories. They compare DNA to people with access. They compare vehicle evidence to phone data. They compare public behavior to private movement. That is the slow work of a serious investigation. And according to the transcript, this work may be closing in, not exploding outward, not chasing every online theory. Closing in. That idea gives Chapter 6 its tension, because the transcript does not present the case as solved. It presents it as narrowing. The vehicle is in evidence. The DNA is being processed. Cell tower data is being mapped. The 911 call is sealed. The doorbell footage is sealed. Financial records are being reviewed. Witnesses are being interviewed again. And the reported language from Banfield's source remains in the background. The son-in-law may be the prime suspect. Those words still require caution. Tommaso Cioni has not been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement in the transcript. He has not been charged. He has not been arrested. The report is attributed to Ashley Banfield's law enforcement source, not an official public announcement. That must be repeated because the case is not a trial yet. But caution does not mean ignoring the movement. And the movement appears to be inward, toward people who knew Nancy, toward people who had access, toward people whose vehicles could matter, toward people whose phones can be mapped, toward people whose statements can be tested, toward people whose public grief can be compared with private evidence. That last idea is uncomfortable, but it is important. The transcript says Tommaso appeared publicly with the family, participated in the search, and stood beside Savannah Guthrie during public appeals. It also says investigators do not accept grief at face value. They measure it against evidence. That does not mean grief is fake. A person can grieve and still be under scrutiny. A person can look devastated and still have a timeline that needs explaining. A person can participate in searches and still be examined. A person can stand beside family and still have phone records that matter. Investigators cannot stop because someone looks emotional. They must ask whether the evidence agrees with the person's story. That is where many cases turn. Not when someone acts suspicious in public, but when their private data does not match their public position. The transcript puts it clearly. Investigators compare what someone says publicly with what the phone records show privately, what cell tower data recorded, what the vehicle held, what DNA reveals, and what the 911 call captured. That is the difference between performance and proof. Performance can convince an audience. Proof must convince a courtroom. And sealed evidence is often where proof begins. The 911 call may hold the first words. The doorbell footage may hold the first movements. The DNA may hold the first biological link. Together, those pieces may explain why the case has not faded, why investigators are still working, why a law enforcement source used such careful but serious language, why the investigation appears to be moving with purpose. This is also where witness interviews become important. The transcript says neighbors and people who had contact with Nancy before she vanished may be interviewed again. Investigators may look for small details, a car parked somewhere unusual, a light on at an odd hour, a conversation that seemed off, or a visitor who came more than once in a short period. That is how cases are often solved. Not always with a dramatic confession. Sometimes with a neighbor remembering one thing. A car, a sound, a visitor, a light, a time, a detail that seemed useless until phone data made it important. Investigators return to witnesses because memory changes when context changes. A neighbor may not remember a car until shown a date. A friend may not realize a conversation mattered until asked about a specific week. A family member may not connect a strange comment to the disappearance until investigators ask the right question. That is why the sealed doorbell footage and witness interviews may work together. Footage shows movement. Witnesses explain context. Phone records show location. Vehicle data shows route. DNA shows contact. Each piece strengthens or weakens the others. That is the closing-in process. It is not fast. It is not always visible, but it is powerful. The transcript also points to financial records. It says investigators are reviewing money, insurance policies, debts, transfers, withdrawals, and possible financial pressure, because when scrutiny turns towards someone inside a family, motive becomes one of the threads investigators pull. Again, this is method, not accusation. Looking at money does not mean someone committed a crime. But if a person close to Nancy had financial pressure, control over accounts, conflict over assets, expected benefits, or unexplained transactions, investigators would need to know. Motive helps explain why. Physical evidence explains how. Digital evidence explains when. Witnesses explain context. Together, those build a case. And right now, according to the transcript, investigators may be putting those pieces together behind a wall of silence. The public wants immediate answers, but investigators often move quietly when a case is serious. The public asks why no one has been arrested. Investigators may be waiting for lab results. The public asks why footage is sealed. Investigators may be protecting trial evidence. The public asks why the 911 call is not released. Investigators may be using it to test statements. The public asks why DNA is taking time. Investigators may be building a genetic genealogy tree. The public asks why the source said may be instead of is, because responsible investigators and journalists know the difference between suspicion and proof. That difference is the line this chapter must respect. The case is moving, but it is not publicly proven. The direction is serious, but it is not a conviction. The source's wording matters, but evidence must still do the final work. That is why the ending of this documentary should not claim answers the transcript does not confirm. It should end with the feeling of pressure tightening around the evidence. Nancy Guthrie's truth may already exist inside the materials investigators have collected, inside the vehicle, inside the blood test, inside the phone records, inside the doorbell footage, inside the 911 call, inside a DNA profile moving through genealogy, inside one witness remembering one detail, inside one timeline that does not match. That is what makes the case feel close. Not finished. Close. The transcript ends with the idea that the truth is not hidden beyond reach. It exists inside the evidence already collected, inside digital records being reviewed, inside forensic results still being processed, and investigators are getting closer with every passing week. That is the final note. Not certainty. Momentum. Not accusation. Direction. Not closure. Pressure. Nancy's story began with a home that should have been safe. It moved through damaged cameras, blood near an entrance, a vehicle in evidence, ransom notes that may have confused the case, and a reported investigative shift toward someone inside her circle. But the most important answers may still be sealed. And maybe that is why the investigation feels so quiet from the outside, because the loudest evidence is not always released first. Sometimes it waits. In a recording, in a frame of footage, in a DNA result, in a phone ping, in a vehicle trace, in a single contradiction that makes the whole story collapse. For now, Tommaso Cioni remains uncharged and unarrested in the transcript, and no public law enforcement agency is described as naming him a suspect. That matters and must remain clear. But according to the reported source, investigators may be looking closer at the son-in-law, and according to the evidence picture laid out in the transcript, that inward movement may not be random. The cameras may explain it. The vehicle may explain it. The blood may explain it. The phones may explain it. The sealed evidence may explain it. And somewhere inside all of it, the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie may already be sitting in plain sight, waiting for the moment investigators can finally reveal it. Until then, this case remains unfinished, but not still. It is moving, carefully, quietly, with purpose, and every step appears to be moving closer to home. The hardest truth in the Nancy Guthrie case is not only that she vanished, it is where the investigation may now be pointing. For months, people wanted the answer to be somewhere outside her life. A stranger, a masked figure, a kidnapper, someone unknown. Someone who came from far away, entered her world for one night, and disappeared before anyone could stop them. That version was terrifying, but it was also easier to hold. Because if the danger came from outside, then Nancy's closest circle could remain untouched. Her family could stand together against the same enemy. Her home could still be remembered as a safe place that was invaded. Her trust in the people around her would not become part of the mystery. But according to the transcript, the case may now be moving in a more painful direction. Ashley Banfield reportedly received information from a trusted law enforcement source who said the son-in-law may be the prime suspect, while also making clear that Tommaso Cioni has not been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement, has not been charged, and has not been arrested. That caution matters. It must stay at the center of this story. A source's wording is not a verdict. A reported investigative focus is not proof. Suspicion is not guilt. No one should be convicted by a headline, a clip, a theory, or public pressure. But the wording still matters because it suggests movement. And in a case that has been filled with silence, sealed evidence, and unanswered questions, movement means something. It means investigators may no longer be treating this as a wide-open stranger case. It means they may be comparing every public statement against private evidence. It means they may be testing grief against records. It means the answer may be closer to Nancy than many people wanted to believe. The transcript lays out why that inward movement may be happening. Nancy was 84 years old. She had limited mobility. She had routines. She trusted the people closest to her. She could not simply disappear easily on her own. The cameras at her property were damaged or missing. Blood was reportedly found near the entrance. A back door was open. A family-connected vehicle was taken into evidence. Phone records and cell tower data were being reviewed. Ransom notes were being questioned. And sealed evidence may still hold the strongest answers. Taken alone, each detail may have more than one explanation, but together they create pressure. That pressure is what investigators follow, not emotion, not internet theories, not public opinion. Evidence. The damaged cameras raise one question. Who knew where they were? The blood near the entrance raises another. What happened at that doorway? The open back door raises another. Was that the true exit? Or was it meant to look that way? The vehicle raises another. Was Nancy ever inside it? The phone records raise another. Did everyone's story match their location? The ransom notes raise another. Were they real or were they misdirection? The sealed 911 call raises another. What was said before anyone had time to prepare? The full doorbell footage raises another. Who came near Nancy's home before February 1st? The DNA raises another. Whose biological trace was left behind, and where? That is why this case feels like it is tightening. Not because the public has every answer, but because the evidence described in the transcript appears to be narrowing the circle. The transcript says investigators are reviewing multiple threads at the same time. Ransom notes, the vehicle seizure, damaged cameras, possible staging, cell tower data, DNA from blood near the entrance, and sealed evidence. It also says, those threads may be leading toward a narrower circle of people. That is the key phrase. A narrower circle. That is what makes this update so heavy. A wide circle means uncertainty. A narrow circle means investigators may be getting closer. And if that circle includes someone connected to Nancy, then the case becomes more than a disappearance. It becomes a betrayal question. Not a proven betrayal. Not a legal conclusion, but a question investigators may now be forced to ask. Was Nancy taken by someone she did not know? Or did someone close enough to understand her world use that closeness against her? That is the emotional center of the ending. Because Nancy's life, as described in the transcript, was built around trust. She went to Mass. She called her daughter every day. She had routines. She had family. She had a home she should have been able to grow old in quietly. And then she vanished. The tragedy is not only that she disappeared, it is that the people searching for the truth may have to search inside the very circle where she should have been protected. That does not mean the answer is already known. It means the question has become impossible to avoid. Investigators do not accept appearances as proof. A person can grieve in public and still be examined. A person can join searches and still have their timeline tested. A person can stand beside a family and still have their phone records compared against their statements. That is not cruelty. That is what a serious investigation requires. The transcript makes this point clearly. Investigators measure what someone says publicly against phone records, cell tower data, vehicle evidence, DNA, and the 911 call. That is the difference between emotion and evidence. Emotion can move an audience. Evidence moves a case. And in this case, the evidence may be moving quietly. The vehicle may reveal a route. The blood may reveal contact. The phone records may reveal a contradiction. The cameras may reveal what someone tried to hide. The ransom notes may reveal misdirection. The sealed footage may reveal repeated visits. The 911 call may reveal a name, a sound, or a first version of events. The DNA may reveal a connection no one can explain away. That is why the silence around the case does not mean nothing is happening. Sometimes silence means investigators are protecting the strongest parts of the case. Sometimes silence means lab work is still moving. Sometimes silence means a timeline is being built carefully enough to survive in court. Sometimes silence means the public is not supposed to know everything yet. And that may be exactly what is happening here. The transcript ends with the idea that the truth may already exist inside evidence investigators have collected: digital records, forensic results, vehicle evidence, sealed materials, and records still being reviewed. That is a powerful ending, because it does not pretend the case is solved. It says the answer may already be within reach. Not in rumor, not in online guesses, not in emotional reactions, but in the evidence. The evidence does not need to shout. It only needs to match. A phone ping matching a vehicle route. A witness statement matching footage. A DNA result matching a location. A financial record matching motive. A 911 call matching panic. A camera gap matching movement. A cleaning pattern matching timing. That is how a case closes in. Piece by piece. Quietly. Slowly. Until the story someone told no longer fits the records. And when that happens, the investigation changes. The question stops being, could this have happened? It becomes, can this be proven? That is where Nancy's case may be heading. But until law enforcement publicly announces a suspect, files charges, or makes an arrest, this story remains unfinished. That is important. A good documentary should not outrun the evidence. It should not turn maybe into is. It should not turn scrutiny into guilt. It should not turn sealed evidence into confirmed proof. It should show the audience what is known, what is reported, what is still uncertain, and why the direction matters. Because the most dangerous thing in a case like this is pretending certainty exists before it does. The second most dangerous thing is ignoring the evidence because the possible answer is painful. The truth must be allowed to go where it goes. Even if it goes inward, even if it reaches someone the public once saw standing beside the family, even if it makes people question the early images of grief, even if it changes how every clue is understood. Because Nancy deserves more than a comfortable theory. She deserves the truth. Her family deserves the truth. Her community deserves the truth. And if someone tried to misdirect the investigation, they deserve to have that misdirection fail. That is what makes the possible staging so disturbing. If the open back door was meant to point investigators outward, then someone used the house itself as a lie. If the ransom notes were meant to create a kidnapping story, then someone used hope as a weapon. If the cameras were damaged to hide movement, then someone stole the record of Nancy's final known moments. If a vehicle was cleaned, moved, or used in a way that does not match a statement, then the evidence may still remember what someone hoped it would forget. That is why the case is not still. It may look quiet from the outside, but inside the investigation, every piece is moving. The blood is being tested. The vehicle is being processed. The phones are being mapped. The witnesses are being revisited. The footage is being protected. The 911 call is sealed. The DNA work is narrowing. The financial records are being reviewed. And somewhere in all of it, the answer may already be waiting. Nancy Guthrie's story is not only about disappearance. It is about trust. It is about vulnerability. It is about the danger of assuming the first story is the true story. It is about how quickly a home can become evidence. It is about how silence can be mistaken for emptiness when it may actually mean investigators are closer than anyone knows. And it is about an elderly woman who deserved safety in the final years of her life. That is where the documentary should leave the audience. Not with a false conclusion, not with a reckless accusation, but with a sense that the investigation has entered a serious stage. The stranger theory has not been erased completely, but it no longer feels like the only path. The focus may be moving inward, the evidence may be narrowing, the sealed materials may hold the next major break, and the wording that started this update still hangs over the case. The son-in-law may be the prime suspect. Maybe. Not confirmed, not charged, not convicted, but serious enough that every other clue now looks different. The damaged cameras look different. The vehicle looks different. The ransom notes look different. The blood near the entrance looks different. The sealed footage looks different. The public appearances look different. Because once investigators begin looking closer to home, the whole case changes. Nancy Guthrie went missing on February 1st. Since then, the public has searched for a shadow, a stranger, a masked figure, a kidnapper outside the family's world. But according to the evidence picture in this transcript, investigators may be searching somewhere much closer, closer to the home, closer to the family circle, closer to the people who knew her routine, closer to the vehicle that may hold answers, closer to the records that do not forget, closer to the truth someone may have believed would stay hidden. And that is the final truth of this chapter. The case is not over. The evidence is not finished speaking. The public does not have all the answers yet, but something is moving, carefully, quietly, with purpose, and every step appears to be moving closer to home. The story does not end just because the investigation has turned inward. That is the mistake people often make in cases like Nancy Guthrie's. They hear one reported phrase. They hear that a family-connected vehicle was taken into evidence. They hear about blood near the entrance. They hear about damaged cameras. They hear about sealed evidence. And they start thinking the case is already solved. But it is not solved. Not yet. According to the transcript, Ashley Banfield's law enforcement source said the son-in-law may be the prime suspect, but the transcript is also clear that Tommaso Cioni has not been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement, has not been charged, and has not been arrested. That difference matters. It is the line between suspicion and proof. It is the line between investigation and prosecution. It is the line between a reported direction and a legal accusation. And in a case this sensitive, that line cannot be crossed carelessly. Because Nancy Guthrie was a real woman. Her family is real. The people being discussed are real. The pain is real. And if the investigation is moving closer to someone inside her circle, then the next steps must be handled with care, patience, and evidence strong enough to survive in court. That is what happens next. Not noise. Not internet guessing. Not rushing to judgment. Evidence. The vehicle has to be processed. The blood has to be tested. The phone records have to be mapped. The cell tower data has to be compared with statements. The ransom notes have to be traced. The doorbell footage has to be reviewed in full. The 911 call has to be protected and studied. The DNA has to be narrowed. Witnesses have to be interviewed again. And every single piece must be checked against the others. That is how investigators move from may be to we can prove. The transcript says investigators are pulling several threads at once: the ransom notes, vehicle seizure, damaged cameras, possible staging, cell tower data, DNA from blood near the entrance, sealed 911 call, sealed doorbell footage, and genetic genealogy work. That is not a simple investigation. That is a layered one. And layered investigations take time, because one mistake can weaken everything. If investigators arrest too early, the defense can argue the case was rushed. If they release evidence too soon, witnesses may adjust their memories. If they speak publicly before testing is finished, they may lock themselves into a theory. If they rely too heavily on one piece of evidence, the whole case can wobble if that piece is challenged. So they build slowly. They ask the same questions again and again. Who had access? Who knew the cameras? Who knew Nancy's routine? Who needed a vehicle? Whose story does the phone data support? Whose story does it damage? Whose DNA belongs at the scene? Whose DNA does not? Who benefited from a ransom note distraction? Who had a reason to stage the house? Who had something to lose if Nancy's truth came out? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. Because the truth in this case may not come from one dramatic confession. It may come from alignment. A call record aligning with a vehicle route. A vehicle route aligning with a witness statement. A witness statement aligning with doorbell footage. Doorbell footage aligning with damaged cameras. DNA aligning with blood near the entrance. Financial pressure aligning with motive. A 911 call aligning with what someone first said before they had time to prepare. That is how a case closes. Not always with one loud answer. Sometimes with many quiet answers, pointing in the same direction. And if those answers keep pointing inward, then the next stage will be even more painful. Because then investigators will not only be asking what happened to Nancy, they will be asking whether someone close to her had knowledge, access, and opportunity. That is the emotional weight of the case. A stranger theory is frightening, but an inside circle theory is devastating. A stranger theory means danger came from outside. An inside circle theory means the danger may have known her name, her home, her habits, and her trust. That is why the next phase must be handled carefully. Because if the evidence does not support an arrest, then investigators must keep searching. But if the evidence does support one, then the case will change forever. The public will finally see what has been sealed. The 911 call may be played. The full footage may be described. The DNA may be explained. The vehicle findings may be revealed. The phone records may be laid out minute by minute. And then everyone will understand why investigators moved the way they did. Until then, the public only sees shadows. A sentence from a source. A vehicle taken into evidence. A report about blood. A question about cameras. A possible staging theory. A ransom note mystery. But investigators may already see the outline. That is why the ending of this chapter should not feel like closure. It should feel like pressure, building behind a locked door. The transcript says, the truth may already exist inside evidence collected, digital records being reviewed, forensic results still being processed, and investigators are getting closer with every passing week. That is the strongest ending idea. The truth may not be lost. It may be waiting. Waiting in a lab result. Waiting in a phone record. Waiting in a vehicle system. Waiting in a camera file. Waiting in a 911 recording. Waiting in one witness remembering one detail. Waiting in one contradiction that finally cannot be explained. And for Nancy's family, that waiting is its own kind of suffering. They do not only need headlines, they need answers. They need to know where Nancy is. They need to know what happened on February 1st. They need to know whether the person responsible came from outside her life or from inside it. They need truth strong enough to stand, not just truth loud enough to spread. That is what Nancy deserves. Not rumors, not careless accusations, not rushed conclusions. The truth. The full truth. The kind of truth that can survive evidence testing, courtroom pressure, defense arguments, and public scrutiny. Because if this case does move forward, it will not be enough for people online to believe something. Prosecutors will need to prove it. They will need to show why the cameras mattered, why the vehicle mattered, why the blood mattered, why the ransom notes mattered, why the sealed footage mattered, why the phone records mattered, why the investigation turned inward, and most importantly, they will need to show what happened to Nancy. That is the question still standing at the center of everything. Where is Nancy Guthrie? Every other question circles around that one. Who had access? Who knew the home? Who used the vehicle? Who sent the notes? Who appeared on footage? Who left evidence? Who told the truth? Who did not? But the heart of the case remains Nancy, a woman who should have grown old safely, a woman who had routines, a woman who was loved, a woman who trusted people around her, a woman who vanished from the place where she should have been protected. That is why the investigation cannot stop at maybe. It has to reach what happened. And if the evidence is truly closing in, then the next development may be the one that changes everything. An arrest, a confirmed suspect, a forensic match, a vehicle finding, a public release of sealed footage, a charge, or, most importantly, Nancy being found. Until then, the case remains unfinished. But unfinished does not mean inactive. The transcript makes that clear. The investigation is moving, carefully, quietly, with purpose. And every step appears to be moving closer to home. That is where this chapter ends. Not with a verdict, not with an accusation, not with certainty, the evidence has not yet publicly given, but with the feeling that the walls are narrowing, that the stranger theory may no longer be enough, that the sealed evidence may be stronger than the public knows, that investigators may already be holding pieces that will one day explain everything. And when that day comes, the case will no longer be about what people thought. It will be about what the evidence proves. Nancy Guthrie's story is not over. The truth is still moving toward the surface. And somewhere inside the records, the vehicle, the blood, the footage, the 911 call, and the DNA, the answer may already be waiting for its moment to speak. The next break in Nancy Guthrie's case may not come from a press conference. It may not come from a dramatic arrest video. It may not come from a neighbor suddenly remembering something huge. It may come from something much quieter, a lab result, a phone ping, a trace inside a vehicle, a frame of footage the public has not seen. A voice on a sealed 911 call, a DNA match that finally gives investigators the name they have been working toward. That is what makes this stage of the case so tense. Because according to the transcript, the investigation is not standing still. The vehicle is in evidence, DNA is being processed, cell tower data is being mapped, the 911 call is sealed, the full doorbell footage is sealed, and genetic genealogy work may be narrowing branch by branch toward a name. That means the truth may already be inside the evidence. Not fully revealed, not ready for the public, not ready for court, but already collected, already protected, already moving through the slow, careful process that separates suspicion from proof. And that is the most important difference in this case. Suspicion can happen quickly. Proof takes time. Suspicion can spread through one headline. Proof has to survive testing. Suspicion can be shaped by emotion. Proof has to stand up to lawyers, experts, judges, and jurors. That is why investigators may appear quiet from the outside. Quiet does not always mean they are lost. Sometimes quiet means they are protecting the very evidence that will matter most later. The public wants every answer immediately. Who is the suspect? Where is Nancy? What did the cameras show? Whose blood was found? Why was the vehicle taken? Who sent the ransom notes? What is on the 911 call? But investigators cannot answer every question in public before the case is ready. If they do, they risk damaging the case they are trying to build. That is why sealed evidence matters. It gives investigators something private to test against public statements. If someone tells police one version of events, investigators can compare it to the 911 call. If someone says they were never near the house, investigators can compare it to doorbell footage and cell tower data. If someone says they had no contact with Nancy that night, investigators can compare it to DNA, vehicle evidence, phone records, and witness statements. If someone says a ransom note proves an outside kidnapping, investigators can test whether the note actually came from an outsider. That is how cases narrow, not from noise, from comparison. And according to this transcript, comparisons are happening everywhere. Physical evidence is being compared with digital evidence. Witness interviews are being compared with footage. Phone records are being compared with timelines. Vehicle evidence is being compared with movement. Ransom notes are being compared with motive. DNA is being compared with people who had access. That is why the investigation may be getting closer. Not because the public knows everything, but because investigators may know enough to keep moving inward. The transcript's central phrase still hangs over every clue. The son-in-law may be the prime suspect, That wording must be repeated carefully. Tommaso Cioni has not been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement in the transcript. He has not been charged. He has not been arrested. The statement is attributed to Ashley Banfield's law enforcement source, not an official public announcement. But the phrase still matters, because it suggests investigators may be looking at someone closer to Nancy than the public first imagined. And if that is true, then the evidence has to explain why. The damaged cameras may explain part of it. Who knew where they were? Who understood their angles? Who knew what they could capture? The blood near the entrance may explain part of it. Whose blood was it? How did it get there? Did it show injury, contact, movement, or confrontation? The open back door may explain part of it. Was it the true exit, or was it left open to create a stranger story? The family-connected vehicle may explain part of it. Was Nancy ever inside it? Did it travel somewhere important? Did it carry trace evidence? Was it cleaned? The digital records may explain part of it. Did phones match people's statements? Did cell towers confirm or contradict timelines? Did devices show searches, deletions, or communication that mattered? The ransom notes may explain part of it. Were they genuine? Were they opportunistic? Or were they misdirection designed to make the case look like an outside kidnapping? Every piece asks a question. And if enough answers point in the same direction, the case changes. That is what investigators are waiting for. Enough. Enough to move from may be to is being charged. Enough to move from reported focus to public accusation. Enough to move from a quiet investigation to a courtroom. Enough to tell Nancy's family what happened. But until that moment comes, the case remains suspended between two painful realities. The evidence appears to be moving, but Nancy is still missing. That is the part no forensic test can soften. A family can hear that investigators are making progress and still go to sleep without knowing where their mother is. They can hear that the vehicle is being processed and still not have Nancy home. They can hear that DNA is being tested and still have no final answer. They can hear that the case may be narrowing inward and feel both hope and dread at the same time. Because if the truth is close to home, then the answer may hurt in a different way. A stranger would be horrifying. Someone close would be devastating. That is why this case carries such emotional weight. Nancy was not only vulnerable because of age, she was vulnerable because she trusted. She had routines. She had people who knew those routines. She lived in a home that should have protected her. And if someone used that trust, that knowledge, or that access against her, then this was not only a disappearance. It was a betrayal. Again, that remains a question, not a conclusion. A documentary must respect that line. But it is the question the transcript keeps circling. Was Nancy taken by a stranger? Or did someone inside her world know exactly how to reach her? The evidence may answer that. The sealed 911 call may answer it. The full doorbell footage may answer it. The vehicle may answer it. The blood test may answer it. The DNA may answer it. The phone records may answer it. And maybe one witness, remembering one small thing, may finally complete the picture. That is why witness interviews matter so much at this stage. The transcript says neighbors and people who had contact with Nancy before she vanished may be questioned again about small details. An unusual car, a light on at the wrong hour, a strange conversation, or a visitor who came more than once in a short period. Those details may seem tiny at first, but after investigators build a timeline, tiny details can become enormous. A neighbor who saw a vehicle may confirm phone data. A person who noticed a visitor may confirm doorbell footage. A friend who heard Nancy mention concern may give context to motive. A small timing detail may prove someone arrived earlier than they admitted. That is how the truth comes together. Not all at once, piece by piece. A case like this is not a straight road. It is a net. Every strand connects to another strand. The vehicle connects to the phone. The phone connects to the footage. The footage connects to the witness. The witness connects to the timeline. The timeline connects to the blood. The blood connects to DNA. The DNA connects to a person. And once the net is tight enough, Whoever is inside it has very little room left to move. That is the feeling this chapter should leave behind. The investigation is not finished, but the room may be getting smaller. The transcript ends with the idea that Nancy's truth is not hidden beyond reach. It says the truth exists inside evidence already collected, inside digital records being reviewed, inside forensic results still being processed, and that investigators are getting closer with every passing week. That is the final emotional note. The truth is not gone. It is waiting. Waiting in records that do not forget. Waiting in evidence that does not care about public image. Waiting in lab work that moves slower than grief, but can speak louder than rumor. Waiting in one final connection that may turn suspicion into proof. Until then, Nancy's family waits too. They wait for a call. They wait for an update. They wait for a name. They wait for a location. They wait for the answer to the question that has haunted every chapter of this story. Where is Nancy? That question must remain at the center. Not the son-in-law, not the vehicle, not the ransom notes, not the online theories. Nancy. She is the reason the evidence matters. She is the reason the investigators keep pulling threads. She is the reason sealed footage, phone records, blood tests, and DNA profiles carry such weight. Because behind every clue is a woman who vanished from a life she should have been allowed to keep living. So, what happens next? Investigators keep working. They process the vehicle. They test the blood. They map the phones. They study the footage. They trace the ransom notes. They review financial records. They compare statements. They wait for DNA. And when enough pieces align, the silence will break. Maybe with an arrest. Maybe with a public suspect announcement. Maybe with a forensic match. Maybe with a search warrant. Maybe with Nancy finally being found. But something in this case appears to be moving. Carefully, quietly, with purpose. And every movement described in the transcript seems to bring the investigation closer to the place where the truth may have been hiding all along. Closer to the home. Closer to the family circle. Closer to the vehicle. Closer to the records. Closer to the sealed evidence. Closer to the answer. Nancy Guthrie's story is not over. It should not be rushed. It should not be twisted into certainty before the evidence is public. But it also should not be ignored. Because if the investigation is narrowing the way the transcript suggests, then the next chapter may not be about theories anymore. It may be about proof. And when proof finally speaks, it will not matter who looked innocent, who stayed silent, who stood beside the cameras, or who thought the truth had been buried. The evidence will speak for Nancy. And that may be the voice that finally brings her home.